Jung Tae-hyun had spent 55 nights sleeping on the sidewalks of Los Angeles, testing which woman would treat him like a person instead of an inconvenience. Imani Grant was the only one who did. A spare key, a couch, 90 days of a truth she never knew was a lie. At her kitchen table, he finally told her everything. His real name, the 4 companies, the marriage his father was arranging, the $11 million he'd refused to touch for 3 months, just to find out if anyone would help a man who had nothing. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no. She said she needed time. That same day, Tae-hyun told his father he wasn't marrying Yuri Song, and his mother asked, out loud, what a family like Imani's could possibly bring them. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, Parts 1 through 2 are everything you need. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Now let's get into Part 2. Imani went back to work on a Monday, 11 days after the kitchen table, and did not tell either of her directors why she'd looked like she hadn't slept in almost 2 weeks. She had not asked Tae-hyun to leave the apartment outright. She had asked him to give her room, which he had taken, with a literalness that surprised her, as an instruction to leave entirely. He'd checked into a mid-range extended stay off Crenshaw, not a hotel with his family's money attached to it, because some instinct in him still refused to let this become a story about what he could buy his way back into. He texted her exactly once a day, always the same shape of message, no pressure attached to it, no demand for a decision, just proof that he was still there, still choosing the smaller life over the easy one, even now that the disguise had ended. Still here, not going anywhere. No rush. She read every one of them twice, and answered none of them, because she hadn't yet decided which parts of the last 90 days she was still allowed to trust. Her mother noticed first, the specific quiet of a daughter carrying something she wasn't ready to name. Diane Grant had raised Imani to talk through hard things, at a kitchen table with a plate of food in front of her, the same table Tae-hyun had confessed at 11 days earlier, and she waited exactly as long as her patience allowed before she finally asked, "That man call you the one you told me about? The one with the 4 companies? He's not calling me, he's texting, 1 line a day." Imani pushed rice around her plate. "Mama, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with a man who lied to me for 3 months and then turned out to be telling the truth about everything that mattered." "What's the lie exactly? The name or the money?" "Both. Neither. I don't know." Imani looked up. "He let me believe he had nothing, and everything he did while I believed that was real. The couch, the dishes, putting exact change back in my emergency jar. But he also let me fall for a man who could have told me the truth at any point in 90 days, and chose not to, and I keep going back and forth on whether that's a betrayal, or just the only way he knew how to find out if I was safe to be honest with." "Sounds like you already know what you think," Diane said. "You're just scared of what it costs you to say it out loud." His mother asked what a family like ours could possibly bring them. Diane set down her fork with the specific, deliberate calm of a woman who had absorbed worse insults than this one, and outlasted every person who delivered them. "Baby, your father carried mail through Inglewood for 31 years in every kind of weather this city's got, and I fed 400 children a decent lunch a day for 20 of those years, without a single one of them going hungry on my watch. We didn't bring people money. We brought people what they actually needed, which is a different currency entirely, and it's one his mother's never had to learn how to spend." She picked her fork back up. "You let his family worry about what you bring. You worry about whether the man is worth keeping." At work the following afternoon, one of the 3 directors Imani kept from missing his own meetings asked her, offhand, whether she'd seen the trade press piece about Jung Import Holdings pulling out of merger talks with a Busan-based shipping conglomerate. She said she hadn't. She spent her lunch break reading it twice in a bathroom stall, hands cold around her phone, absorbing for the first time the specific scale of the thing she'd spent 11 days deciding whether to answer a text message about: 4 subsidiaries, a board of 9, a family net worth the article estimated in a range that made the number in her emergency jar feel almost obscene by comparison. She thought about the couch, the good pillow, the $11, exact to the cent, replaced without ceremony, because he'd wanted the jar to say something true again. None of it matched the man in the article, and all of it matched the man who'd sat on her floor eating leftover rice like it was the finest meal he'd had in months, and she understood, standing in a bathroom stall 2 buildings from where she'd found him, that she was going to have to decide which version of him she was actually falling for, or whether, impossibly, they had never been 2 different men at all. She didn't answer his text that night either, but she read it 3 times instead of 2, which felt, to her, like its own kind of answer forming. Choi Woo-jin found Yoon Mi-suk waiting for him outside the Figueroa office on a Wednesday afternoon, which had never once happened in 11 years, and he understood immediately that whatever she wanted, she intended to get it without her son's knowledge. "You know where he's living," she said. "Not a question. I know he's safe. I didn't ask if he was safe. I asked if you know where." Mi-suk's voice carried the specific brittle precision of a woman who had spent 29 years being obeyed and had recently discovered, for the first time, that obedience had limits. "I want to meet her. Taehyun asked me specifically not to involve you. Taehyun asked you not to tell his father where he was sleeping for 3 months. That's not the same request." She studied Woo-jin with the same sharp assessment she'd once used to evaluate her son's business partners. "I am not going to threaten this woman, Woo-jin. I raised 1 son and buried a version of the life I thought I'd have with his father a long time ago. I want to see, with my own eyes, whether she's real or whether my son built himself a fantasy to survive 3 months of being poor." He'd known Mi-suk since she was newly married into a family that measured everything by return, and he'd watched her, across 3 decades, harden into someone who mistook control for care because nobody had ever modeled the alternative for her. "If I give you the address," he said finally, "you go as yourself. No lawyers, no offers, no number written on a card, and you tell your son afterward, whatever you find there, he deserves to know his mother went looking on her own, instead of hearing it secondhand from someone who owed him the truth. I know how this is done, Woo-jin. That's exactly what worries me. You know how deals are done, Mrs. Jung. You've never once had to know how apologies are done, because your husband never taught you that vocabulary. He doesn't believe in it. If you go to that apartment with a deal-maker's instincts, you'll leave with a war you didn't intend to start." Mi-suk was quiet at that, longer than Woo-jin expected. In 11 years he had watched her arrange flowers for board dinners and sit through negotiations she wasn't permitted to speak in, and he had rarely seen the specific flicker that crossed her face now, something closer to recognition than offense. "When I married into this family," she said finally, "I was 23 years old and I thought love was a thing that arrived eventually, the way trust arrives between business partners who keep their word long enough. I was wrong. It never arrived. I raised a son instead, and I told myself that was enough currency to build a life on." She looked at Woo-jin directly. "I am not going to that apartment to make a deal. I am going because my son found, in 3 months of having nothing, the one thing I never managed to find in 29 years of having everything. I want to understand how." She found the address on her own, 2 days later anyway, without Woo-jin's help, the way people with resources always eventually did, and stood outside the laundromat beneath Imani's apartment for 11 minutes before she worked up whatever version of courage a woman like her had left to spend on a stranger's daughter. Imani opened the door, already knowing, somehow, exactly who was standing on the other side of it. "Mrs. Jung, you know my face. Tae described you pretty accurately." Imani didn't step back from the doorway, didn't invite her in either. "He said you only liked one of his choices in 29 years, and it wasn't a woman. I'm guessing I'm not about to become the second." She just opened the door on the one woman who could end this before it even starts. "Like and subscribe to help us grow so we can keep making more of this for you, if you're already holding your breath for what happens next. This conversation is about to get a lot more honest than either of them planned. Stay close." Mi-suk had rehearsed a dozen versions of this conversation on the drive over, most of them built around the specific vocabulary her husband used for negotiations. Leverage, terms, what a situation like this would require to resolve cleanly. Standing in the doorway of a one-bedroom above a laundromat, watching a young woman who hadn't so much as blinked at being ambushed on her own doorstep, every rehearsed line evaporated at once. "May I come in?" Mi-suk said. And it wasn't quite a question either. Imani stepped aside. The apartment was small, in the specific way Mi-suk had never once had to live inside. A couch that folded flat, a kitchen table with two mismatched chairs, a jar on the counter with a handful of dollar bills in it that Mi-suk clocked immediately and understood, with a discomfort she wasn't prepared for, exactly what it represented. He slept there, Mi-suk said, looking at the couch. For 3 months, my son. He did. Why did you let him stay? Because it was 51 degrees, and about to rain, and I had a spare key, and nobody else on that block was going to do anything but step around him. Imani folded her arms, not defensively, just plainly. I didn't know he had 4 companies, Mrs. Young. I knew he hadn't eaten a real meal in longer than he wanted to admit, and that seemed like the only fact that mattered that night. Mi-suk was quiet for a long moment, turning something over that had nothing to do with the words Imani had just said. My husband told him love was for men who could afford the risk of it, she said finally, more to herself than to Imani. I never once disagreed with him out loud. 29 years, and I never once said it out loud, even when I believed something different. Do you believe something different? I believe, Mi-suk said, choosing the words with the specific care of a woman unaccustomed to admitting uncertainty, that my son spent 3 months being poor to find out if anyone could love him without an account statement attached, and that he found exactly one person who did, and that terrifies me far more than it should, for reasons that have very little to do with you. What reasons? Because it means everything his father and I built was never actually the thing that made him worth loving. Mi-suk looked at the jar on the counter again. I don't know how to be the mother of a son who learned that lesson from a stranger's kitchen instead of his own. You could learn it too, Imani said. It's not a complicated lesson, it just costs something to admit. Mi-suk almost laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to catch her off guard, as much as it did Imani. You're direct. He mentioned that. I assumed he meant it as a warning. He probably did. I've never been very good at letting people manage me carefully. Imani softened, just slightly, watching the older woman's hands fold and unfold in her lap. For what it's worth, Mrs. Jung, I'm not trying to take anything from your family. I didn't grow up wanting 4 companies or a name on a building. I grew up watching my mother stretch a school cafeteria paycheck into a childhood I never once felt cheated out of. I don't need what you have, I just don't want to be told I'm not enough without it. My husband would say that's a very expensive kind of pride. Your husband's never had to have the cheap kind, Imani said, not unkindly. I have. It's the only kind that's ever been available to people like my parents, and it's gotten us exactly as far as it was ever going to. I'm not ashamed of it. Mi-suk stood, smoothing her coat, and for a moment looked less like the woman who'd arrived with 29 years of practiced control and more like someone considerably younger, considerably less certain. I don't know what I came here to find, she admitted. I think I found it anyway. What was it? Proof that my son didn't imagine you, Mi-suk said. I was almost hoping he had. It would have been simpler. She paused at the door, one hand on the frame, and added, quieter. It would also have been a lie I'd have had to live with for the rest of his life. I'm glad in the end that it wasn't one. Jung Sang-hoon learned about his wife's visit before Tae-hyun did, from a source inside the household staff who reported to him out of habit rather than loyalty, and he arrived at the Figueroa office the following morning with the specific controlled fury of a man who considered his own family a variable that had stopped behaving predictably. Your mother went to see her, he said, without preamble, closing Tae-hyun's office door behind him. I know. Woo-jin told me. And you're not angry? I'm not surprised. Tae-hyun set down the contract he'd been reviewing, his first real week back at partial capacity, easing into decisions he'd deliberately avoided for 3 months. You've spent my whole life treating this family like a corporation with a succession problem. Mother finally did something that wasn't cleared by you first. I'd have thought you'd respect the initiative. Do not test me on tone, Tae-hyun. Not on this. Sang-hoon crossed to the window, the same controlled stillness he used before delivering terms he considered non-negotiable. The Song family called this morning. Yuri's father wants an answer by the end of the month. Not a delay, an answer. You already have my answer. You have 90 days of sleeping in a stranger's apartment and a fantasy you've mistaken for a foundation. Sang-hoon turned from the window. I am not asking you to stop seeing this woman, if that's what you require to feel you've proven something to yourself. I am telling you that this company does not run on what you require. It runs on alliances I have spent 4 decades building, and the song shipping lanes are not a sentiment I can afford to lose because my son wants, once in his life, to feel chosen for free. Then choose someone else to protect the alliance. Taehyun's voice stayed level, the same steadiness he'd learned on a sidewalk with $11 in his pocket. I'm not walking away from the one person who's ever treated me like I was worth something, with nothing on the table. Not for a shipping contract. Not for you. You would let 4 decades of work collapse over a mail carrier's daughter. I would let 4 decades of your definition of worth collapse. Taehyun said, if that's what it takes to build a different one. You raised me to inherit an empire, father. You never once asked whether I wanted to inherit the loneliness that came with it. Sang-hoon said nothing for a long moment, the silence stretching in a way that felt, for the first time in Taehyun's adult life, less like control and more like a man genuinely unsure of his next move. He walked to the desk, picked up a framed photograph Taehyun kept there, the two of them at a warehouse groundbreaking 20 years earlier, Sang-hoon's hand on his son's shoulder, both of them squinting into the same sun. I built this company so you would never have to know what it felt like to have nothing, Sang-hoon said, quieter now, the negotiator's edge gone from his voice for the first time in the conversation. I did not build it so you would go looking for nothing on purpose, to prove a point to a father who only ever wanted to spare you the thing I grew up with. I know that, Taehyun said. I understand it better now than I did 3 months ago. But you spared me poverty and handed me something else instead, a life where I couldn't tell the difference between being wanted and being useful. I needed to find out if there was a difference. There is. Her name is Imani, and she taught me that without ever knowing she was teaching me anything. You have until the end of the month, Sang-hoon said finally, setting the photograph down. Same as the songs. Decide which family you actually belong to. Both families just handed him the same ultimatum on the same deadline. Like and subscribe to help us grow so we can keep this story going, if you want to see which one he actually chooses. Comment below if his father just underestimated how far his son will go for this. We're not done yet. Imani found him outside her building on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the kitchen table, standing in almost the exact spot where she'd first crouched down with half a sandwich, and something about the symmetry of it made her stop on the sidewalk before she reached him. You didn't text today, she said quietly, the words costing her more than she expected them to. I ran out of ways to say the same simple line, without it starting to sound hollow. He looked older than he had 90 days ago, though nothing about his face had actually changed, just the specific weight of a man who'd spent 3 weeks discovering that money solved almost nothing that actually mattered to him. My father gave me until the end of the month to choose between this and a shipping contract with the Song family. My mother came to see you without telling me. I've spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to walk back into your life without making it about anything my family wants from either of us. Your mother told me something, Imani said, that everything your father built was never actually the thing that made you worth loving. She said it scared her more than it should. Does it scare you? No. Imani said it plainly, the same directness she'd used the night she handed him a spare key. What scares me is that I already know what I think, and I've spent 3 weeks pretending I needed more time to think it, because saying it out loud means choosing a fight with a family that's got 4 decades of practice getting what they want. So say it. I don't care about the 4 companies, Taehyun. I never did. I didn't even know they existed for 90 days, and those were the best 90 days I've had in longer than I want to admit. She stepped closer. Close enough that he could see her hands were shaking slightly, the only sign she gave that this cost her something. What I care about is whether the man who fixed my cabinet hinge and put exactly $11 back in that jar is still in there somewhere, underneath the name and the accounts, and the father giving you deadlines. Is he? He never left. Taehyun reached for her hand, slow enough that she could have stopped him, and she didn't. He's not going anywhere, not for a shipping contract, not for anyone's deadline but yours. Then we're going to do this the hard way, Imani said. Your family's way, if they insist on it being a fight, but we're doing it together, or we're not doing it at all. Together, he said, like he was testing whether the word still worked the same way it had on her couch. I can live with that deadline. Good. Imani looked past him, at the laundromat sign flickering on for the evening, at the sidewalk where all of this had started, with a sandwich she'd almost decided not to give him. Because I don't think your family's finished making this harder than it needs to be. Your mother told me she came here half expecting to find out you'd imagined me. Did she find something else? She said she found proof you hadn't. Imani studied him, weighing something. Your father hasn't come looking yet. That worries me more than anything your mother said. My father doesn't come looking, Taehyun said. He sends terms. If he hasn't sent any yet, it means he's still deciding what he's willing to lose to keep the rest of it intact. He tightened his hand around hers, once, like punctuation. Whatever he decides, I need you to know it changes nothing about this. I already made my choice. He's just the last person in my life who hasn't accepted it yet. And if he never does, then I have a mother who came to your kitchen alone, a lieutenant who'd rather protect me from myself than protect a shipping contract, and you. He said it simply, without any performance in it, the same plain certainty she'd once used to hand a stranger a spare key. That's more family than I had 55 days into sleeping outside a dry cleaner's. I'm not walking away from it because one man hasn't caught up yet. Song Yuri received the message from her father's assistant on a Friday morning in Busan, informing her that the Jung family had, as of that afternoon, declined the engagement. She read it twice. Standing at the window of an office overlooking a shipping yard she'd spent her whole life being groomed to inherit a stake in, and felt something closer to relief than disappointment, which surprised her less than it probably should have. She had met Jung Taehyun exactly once, at a fundraiser neither of them had wanted to attend, and had spent the entire conversation privately grateful that he'd shown no more interest in the arrangement than she had. Still, a declined alliance was rarely the end of a story in a world built on shipping lanes and old debts, and her father was not a man who absorbed refusals gracefully. He chose a secretary, her father said that evening, reading the same message over her shoulder. A poor one. No name, no fortune, no reason for the Jung family to want this beyond sentiment. Then perhaps, Yuri said, setting down her tea, the Jung family finally wants something we've never once offered them. Her father's expression didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. The specific recalibration of a man who had built his entire career on treating refusals as temporary setbacks rather than final answers. He had lost deals before. He had never, in 30 years of shipping contracts and marriage alliances, lost one to a woman with no name attached to it, and the novelty of that seemed to trouble him more than the lost lanes themselves. Sang-hoon and I built this understanding over a decade, he said, before either of our children were old enough to have opinions about it. I don't intend to let his son's sentiment unmake 10 years of careful arrangement over a woman who answers phones for a living. What exactly do you intend to do about it? I intend, her father said, already reaching for his phone, to remind Jung Sang-hoon what those 10 years actually cost him to build, and to let him decide for himself whether his son's happiness is worth losing them. He didn't look up from the screen. Families like ours don't lose gracefully, Yuri. We simply lose slowly, in ways the other side doesn't notice until it's already too late to matter. Yuri didn't answer. She was already thinking, with a clarity that surprised her, about the young woman 3,000 miles away who had no idea yet that a shipping magnate in Busan had just decided her happiness was a problem still worth solving, and 3,000 miles away, in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, Imani Grant was about to learn exactly how far a family like that was willing to go to get back what a wedding contract had promised them. He chose her. His family isn't done choosing back. Comment if you think the Song family lets this go quietly, or if this is only the beginning of the real fight. Part 3 is coming.